Can you say hard hats, folks? Hard hats, lunch pail, steel toe boots.
Anything short of a championship this year is a failure. Look at this boomer right here.
You've just got so much talent here.
Somebody said we need to apologize for Jalen.
Can I call it John? What are we apologizing for? What did we say? What did we do?
The playoff run. And I just really like the team chemistry that they have. Everybody plays a role. And they are really good at, it's a team game and they understand that. And they're always deflecting credit to one another. And that's how it should be. The game of basketball is obviously a team game. And obviously they have tremendous players as well, which is why, they were able to, win the NBA championship. But the team chemistry is something that really stuck out to me. And I think that's something that, I can come in and also just add to that as well, kind of just being a connector and just being able to impact the game in any way I can to help them win.
All right. Welcome to day 2 of the NBA draft. Bobby Manning here, Garden Report. Preview edition, round 2 coming up around 4 o'clock, just a little over an hour from now. The Celtics pick 54th tonight, but first we're going to throw it back to the guy they picked 30th to end last night. Baylor Scheierman talked for the first time just about an hour ago. Heard from him, heard about his workouts, his history with the Celtics, and his impressions of the team and how he can fit in. Noa Dalzell is here from Celtics blog, and want to just ask you right away, what do you think of the pick? What do you think of Scheierman, what you got to know and hear about him and learn a little bit more about him?
Yeah, well, I'll start off with saying that I like the fact that they picked someone older. And I think that first and foremost, the priority is like filling the back end of the bench right now and just not, there's a lot of uncertainty. You don't know who's exactly is going to be back. You hope to have Sam Hauser here long term. You don't know if that's going to be possible. And so they picked someone who, from everything I've understood, he seems to be as NBA ready as it gets, rather than a Jordan Walsh type prospect that is more of a long-term fit. And I like that because I think they have enough projects on the roster right now. And if he can come in and hit some threes and, there's going to be a learning curve, obviously, but there's things that he's really strong at off the bat. And I think the adjustment period is going to be much less than, I guess, a lot of other people that they could have had in that spot. So I liked most everything about it. I think we had talked a couple days ago about whether they were going to get a big, and obviously that's not the direction that they went here. And maybe that's where the 54th pick comes into play tonight. But I think from everything that I've heard about him, seen about him, he seems to check a lot of the boxes for kind of the Missoula system.
Yeah, I do think we put big at the top of the list, and that's not something we talked much about last night. Obviously, Kyle Filipowski was there from Duke. You maybe had a couple other big man options, Jonathan Mogbo. There were some guys there that you maybe could have gone with at that position. And of course, we have some news at the big man position today as well. Big news for the Celtics that we're going to get to pretty shortly here. So what did you think of them not going big here? I think you look to take the best player available, so that's why I like this pick, despite it maybe not being their biggest positional long-term need. But that question at center certainly continues here. And Filipowski was there. Jason Tatum even chimed in a little bit on Twitter and was like, hey, teams are going to regret not taking Filipowski. And it's like, Boston just passed on him. I know he was one of the guys who called Scheierman here, but that's obviously hearing from fans and just people who were reacting to this pick. The only second guess there would be you had a big potentially there who could have slotted in and helped you pretty immediately too at a position of perhaps greater need. Because I don't think Scheierman's going to play a ton this year.
Yeah, he's probably not going to. I mean, Brad said earlier in the week that it's going to be hard for any rookie to crack this rotation if healthy. But again, he's insurance for playing, right? It's like I think half of the roster last year didn't really play much, but was there in case, you had the Svi Mihailovics of the world in case you needed them, and they never really needed them because they did stay pretty healthy last year. But I think the idea is that he is someone that could step up and contribute this season. Whereas I think Jordan Walsh, for example, last year wasn't. I'm not particularly high in Filipowski. I think there's some challenges with his game, and I don't know that he would have been able to contribute this season to Boston. Honestly, nor next one. But with the big man spot, there's so many factors right now that are we don't really know. We don't know what the deal is with Luke Cornett. We don't know if they're planning on bringing back Tillman. We don't know how they're going to use their next draft pick, if there's someone that they're looking to trade for. So I trust Brad. I think this has been a common sentiment among Celtics fans that I've heard from since the draft last night, is that everybody, whether or not you knew a lot about this guy, like you trust what Brad Stevens is doing and you trust the moves that he's making. And so I think that likely they're not putting themselves in a position where they're not going to have a backup big ready for next year. Obviously, that's going to be a position of need, and we'll talk more about that. But yeah, I was a little surprised that they didn't particularly kind of hone in on that for this position, with their 30th pick. And I was honestly surprised they kept the pick. I didn't think they were going to, and as the minutes were passing by, I thought maybe he's actually going to do it. And so it was a little surreal even to see the Celtics drafted number 30.
Yeah, and I think that says a lot. You always hear teams say, we got our guy. They said that last year with Walsh, right? And they traded back 3 times. So it was like, did you really get your guy? This feels like they got their guy. Staying here, picking up, let's say, $7, $8, $9 million between the hit salary-wise and tax that you're going to have to pay to have this guy on the roster, who's probably not going to pay a ton. You obviously would have had to fill the spot with a minimum anyway. But again, you could have traded back into the second round, try to get a guy on a 2-way, try to maybe cut a $500,000 or whatever off the money there potentially, but they stayed. Like you said, no, it was a bit of a surprise that they stayed. They'd never taken a first-round pick under Brad, and they got a guy who they had a connection to previously, which I didn't realize. This was a interesting story he told today on the call.
For Boston, and then I also worked out for him this year, going through the process, and I really enjoyed both times I worked out there. Obviously, meeting the organization and the staff, and I really enjoyed the workouts as well, and the city. Just thoroughly enjoyed my time there, and obviously, I felt like I put a good step forward in those workouts, and I'm just really excited to obviously, have this opportunity in Boston, and excited to get to work. They really liked my game, just my ability to, kind of impact the game in different ways, whether that be shooting, passing, dribbling, or just my IQ. And, they felt like I could get a little stronger, a little quicker, a little more explosive a couple years ago. And, that's kind of what I really tried to, improve on, these last 2 years at Creighton. And I feel like I did that, which kind of put me in the position to be where I am right now. Yeah. Yeah. Well, 2 years ago, obviously I'm 2 years younger. And at the time, coming out of South Dakota State, it's kind of a different level than what I was at these past 2 years at Creighton. And I think, it kind of just opened up my eyes that my first time working out, kind of just what I needed to improve on, and kind of what, the NBA game was kind of all about. And then obviously these last 2 years at Creighton, kind of just really working on that, and the ability to come in this year and kind of just prove that I have grown as a player and as a person. And I think that really helped me obviously throughout this process, and then ended up getting selected.
So you have it. He was a guy Celtics had on their radar 2022, which was the year they picked J.D. Davison, right? That probably would have been Brad's first draft. So the guy who stayed in school, a guy who transferred levels, a guy who played 5 years in college and whole there. And that probably explains a lot about why he was there. Teams hate picking older guys. And this guy's almost 24. Like, think about it. Tatum's 26? And this guy's just 2 years younger. Older than some guys on this roster already, probably, especially Walsh there. So that can go both ways, right? We saw Desmond Bane, another 30th overall pick, come in a little bit older, who stayed in college a little longer and still had a hugely impactful career right away. And for other guys, they just kind of stagnate. I guess what's impressive here with him is he did go back. He did get stronger. The speed numbers at the combine weren't horrible. I think they ranked pretty well. In fact, I think his 3/4 court sprint was the same as Bronny's, believe it or not, from the combine. And, good measurements in terms of his height and wingspan too here on the wing. So yes, just like Hauser, a guy whose role he might fit into eventually, there's some defensive concerns here. But when you look at everything he can do offensively and the improvement year in and year out, and going from that level at South Dakota State to Creighton, he looks like a guy that can, work on his weaknesses and get used to the NBA level and eventually fit into this team. And what gives you the most hope is that the Celtics have done this with a couple of guys now.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing when evaluating this decision in general, is that you just kind of trust their judgment, and you trust that his deficiencies, like potentially the defense, and particularly if he's switching on to small guards or bigs, like, it's obvious that there's going to be some challenges adjusting to the NBA. You saw Sam Hauser do it, you saw Peyton Pritchard do it, and I don't think that that the Celtics would draft any player that they didn't feel like defensively could make the leap, because I do think that they really don't play guys that are defensive liabilities at all.
Right.
And so we've seen that be time and again a priority both in playing time and also who they're signing, who they're bringing on. And so, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on his defensive film, but I do trust that the kind of where he needs to improve, that they have the belief and confidence that he'll be able to do that.
Yep, and I'd imagine he'll spend some time in Maine, although there is some readiness to play right away if there's rest, if there's injuries. I do think they have faith in him, maybe in that Shvi Mihailuk role, being like that reserve wing there in the mix that's with the team sometimes just in case. So I don't think he's going to be in Maine all year like Walsh. I know some people freaked out when I said that, but I'll spend some time in Maine just to get the reps if he's not playing much. Go up there, work on the defense, get acclimated to the speed of the game, especially early on. And we'll see how he does in camp, too. I think that'll tell a lot. And obviously, these guys are excited to go at him with him in camp. Horford reaching out, Tatum, Joe. So already heard from a handful of guys here. Not in Boston yet. So we'll see what number he's wearing and all that and get him officially acclimated when he gets here. But he did talk for the first time today, so you can go check that out over on the CLNS Media channel. 30th overall pick, Baylor Scheierman from Creighton, and the Celtics are going to pick 54th today. Our coverage, of course, is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com and use that code CLNS for 100% deposit match up to $100. And right now, they are giving away a free square, which they do from time to time here. Obviously, the game is you go pick two players, pick more or less on their projections, and you got your daily fantasy team here. They're giving away a gimme, as they often do sometimes. And this one is for UFC this Saturday. Alex Pereira fighting. And all he has to do is get one significant strike. Normally it's 50.5. It would be for Pereira in this spot. But all he has to do is get one for you to get that hit. Get the other one right. Maybe it's women's basketball. Maybe it's baseball. Maybe it's another UFC pick. And you're halfway to winning. So go over there and get that. That is valid through Saturday when the fight's going to take place. I believe Saturday at 3:10 p.m. is when that's going to go. So you have until about then to get this free square over on Prize Picks. And again, use CLNS to get that deposit match and let them know we sent you, our official daily fantasy sports partner right there over at Prize Picks. And the biggest news of the day before we get to 54 and some of the stuff that might happen today, Kristaps Porzingis underwent surgery, and Brad mentioned a couple of days ago on Ryan Russillo's podcast that he could miss at least the start of the season, and he even underplayed that a little bit, I think, in terms of the time he's going to miss here. 5 to 6 months. So we're talking Thanksgiving at the earliest and Christmas more likely here, December, Christmas time for Porzingis to recover from the surgery. So not great. You knew the injury wasn't great when it happened. It didn't sound good, and it certainly almost knocked him out of the finals. And he put himself all on the line to play in that last game because he needed this big of a surgery, this much recovery time to bounce back from that. So certainly some questions to start the year. You hope he's able to recover from this effectively even after he comes back from this and play at the level he's capable of. But they had no choice here, as it sounded from the Celtics release. This is an injury that required surgery, that's going to require this pretty hefty recovery time here. And you just hope he comes out the other side able to play consistently and effectively. But for October, November, part of December, they're just going to have to figure this out. And they didn't really have to do that last year, Noah, right? He missed 3-4 games sometimes, back-to-backs, but he didn't miss any period of time like this.
I mean, except for the playoffs, right? He missed the whole playoffs
Right.
pretty much. And so to me, it was pretty striking that he played in game 5 and that he was looking to play in the finals and everything. Like, I think looking at this recovery timeline and the more we hear about this injury, the more it's kind of remarkable that he was even able to contribute, towards the end there. And I think that if we had known after game 2, when he was talking about, I'll die on the court, I'll be back, if we had known that this is an injury that's a 6-month recovery period, I think everybody would have been pretty surprised. It wasn't at all what it felt like at that time. Joe Mazzulla said zero concern, so that's just one of my initial reactions, was just like how wild this is. That this
Yeah, we've come a long way from zero concern.
I know, a long way. And so that's the first reaction, I guess, there. And then on the rotational piece, I think it's fine because you have such a heads up, and where the injuries really bite you is when it's the beginning of the season and you have a plan, and now all of a sudden your top guys are out the whole year, right? Like they know now going into the offseason that they're not going to have him for the first few months, if not longer. But again, I feel like a broken record because I've said this a million times, but I think you have to build your roster as though he's not on it, honestly. Like that's just the nature of how many injuries he's had to deal with. And so this to me is just a reinforcement of that understanding that for a fact he won't be there first few months of the season. Will he be there in the playoffs? You certainly hope so. But I think that when you're thinking about the offseason moves, the second round draft pick, re-signing some of your bigs that have been proven reliable throughout the season and during the playoffs, I think that this only reinforces the importance of prioritizing those things because for a fact that he won't be around, and most likely he'll have other things throughout the year, right? So I don't want to put out like a negative energy about him, but I think you just have to look at history and just be prepared. And so this past postseason, they were prepared and they were able to withstand him missing almost everything, right?
Yeah, and that's a tough thing to hear, right? That you just almost have to progress like he's not going to be available. It almost reminds you of the Rob Williams experience here, where when he's there, he's that ceiling raiser. You're going to be the best team by miles, but you probably can't count on him being there. And again, you're starting to learn some more things about this injury and how he's going to react to it. I was talking to Dr. Flynn a little bit early, and I guess there's like a socket that they have to basically dig deeper into to get more stability in that area and then rebuild the muscle that he tore around it. So it does seem like a pretty invasive kind of procedure here in terms of what they need to do, and how he recovers from it, how he looks when he gets back, and how he reacts to it is going to be interesting. Like, does he need some ramp up time? Is there going to be some limitations, some time off he needs to take? I know this release said he'll be back in game action 5-6 months in, but you never really know. Could go a little bit longer, might need more time. That might be the time he's getting on the court and ramping up, because obviously with a leg injury, he's not going to be able to do a ton of conditioning here as he recovers. So it's tough. It's brutal for him, I'm sure. He really fought to get back from it, and now this is almost another setback here. So fortunately, you have a handful of these months, 3 of them here, as off-season time for him to just fully focus on recovering. And the Celtics, in the meantime, as you mentioned, though, are going to have to figure out life without him. Obviously, it starts with Horford, who's here for 1 more year, $9 million on the contract. Year by year with him, I'd imagine at this point, in terms of how long he's going to play. But you definitely know he's here for this year. But you have to start to think about how you take the load off him and how you replace him and potentially Porzingis eventually here. So they don't have a lot of resources to do it, to go back to the draft conversation. Might have been smart to take a guy who could have started working toward being in that spot. I know it's tough to do from 30, but you might have had to start to look at that a little bit here, especially because your 3 backup options, or 3 out of the 4 in the front court, are free agents here. And that's where I'm really stuck. What does Luke Cornett want this summer? He's obviously the most reliable, at least a year ago, out of the guys who backed Porzingis and Horford up. Does he want money? He's never really gotten a big payday. Is there a backup, full mid-level, $8, $9, $10 million a year contract out there for him? Tillman, same deal. He wasn't quite the backup last year, but gave some key playoff contributions when you called on him. The defense is excellent. The offense is a real question there. How much is he asking for? And then, of course, Kada's back, and he's the most affordable of them all by far, but he's the biggest question mark out of all of them here. And then O'Shea Brissett's lurking too, who they can't really pay a ton more than they were going to give him on that player option. Does he want to go out and get more money, more playing time? I know there's some buzz out there, that he wants to be back with this team, but is the opportunity right? Is the money right? I mean, he opted out for a reason. So I do think there's a possibility that he could be moving on here. So the great thing you had last year, is options, right? O'Shea was reliable. He brought a certain skill set. X was reliable, brought a certain skill set. Luke could play great in certain matchups and couldn't play at all in other matchups. And so if you're losing 1 or 2 of those guys, it's a little bit harder to kind of have a guy who's more consistently backing up Horford with Porzingis out. So this is going to be tough for them to manage this summer.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's the biggest question mark when you're looking at next year's roster. Like obviously everybody's concerned about the Derek White extension. That's going to be looming, and that's going to be kind of front of mind for folks. But I think the center position and what the depth looks like there is likely going to be the biggest point of emphasis for Brad, also because you don't have returners there, right? Like I really don't know who they're going to bring back here. And to your point, I really don't know how Luke Cornett and Xavier Tillman are perceived in the market. Like I don't.
That's where I'm stuck.
Yeah, like is Luke Cornett going to get a 3-year, $27 million offer? Like, I don't think so, but maybe he does. Like, he had such a unique role on this team that it's hard to think about how this would be manifested in another organization, how they're perceiving the fact that obviously he was on Boston, he was contributing, they relied on him, they trusted him for minutes, but he never had to step beyond his role, right? So it's not quite clear what he's capable of. Everybody knows that he can kind of shoot, but he didn't shoot it all in Boston. So he's just an interesting case. So I just don't know what he's going to see out there. And I think he would like to be back. It seems like, he's a guy that they would like to keep with the organization for the continuity, for everything else.
Who would you prioritize?
Over Tillman or Luke?
Tillman, Luke, O'Shea, that whole group there.
Well, it's a tough one. I guess I'm kind of torn between Luke and Tillman.
It is
tough. I do think Kada is going to be a big part of them moving forward. Just the fact that they signed him to a multi-year deal, I really liked what I saw of him this year. Obviously, there was room for him to grow and kind of get more comfortable, and defensively, he made some mistakes. But I think I really liked what we saw from him, and I loved seeing him in Maine. He just seemed like a NBA-ready player every time I watched him. And then also the fact is that Brad brought his name up on his own accord the other day, right? He brought up him, Jordan Walsh, and Jaden Springer as guys who are they're gonna be thinking about how to ramp up their minutes and things. So he's somebody else that I think is in the mix, but probably you prioritize bringing back Luke just because I think when, besides for the finals, he was really who they turned to whenever they needed somebody.
Yeah, and that's where I lean too, because it wasn't the smoothest transition for Tillman. He didn't play a ton, didn't seem like he totally had Joe's trust, which you understand because he was coming in mid-season, he was hurt, didn't have much time to acclimate to what they were doing. The shot never really got there despite the famous finals one that we'll always remember. So there's questions there. I think there's more questions with him, especially health-wise, than there is Luke, although Luke can't fit into every matchup. So you're going to have some sort of 4 or 5 hybrid kind of guy who can allow you to play a little smaller at that point. If it's Luke and O'Shea, I guess that works because you do have Kada here. And that's the big, big question, right? Is Kada a real factor here going forward? Because he showed those spurts last year. He didn't get to play a ton. He's on a 1-year team option. If they rework that a little bit and give him like 2-3 years, that would say a lot, right? About how much they believe in him and how big of a part he's going to be going forward of this whole thing. And the skill set with him, offensive rebounding, drop coverage, it's a little similar to Luke with more physicality, obviously there. And can he develop skills beyond what he has right now? I think he's a great 3rd option, 4th option when everyone's healthy for now. But does he continue to grow into something there? I think you certainly keep him next year. But that's another question as you start to throw everything together and consider everything here. If someone would take the minimum, that would help a ton. But I look at Luke. I just can't assume Luke's going to take a minimum again. He has that elite skill set when it comes to switching in defense. Someone's going to value that at least more than the minimum. And then you look at O'Shea, who hasn't really had a payday in the pros either. Maybe he takes it just to be part of this whole thing again. And there's nothing else out there. And maybe you try again in a year. Maybe you have a bigger role next year if Tillman's not coming back. So it's tough to predict, right? And a lot of it's just going to come down to what those guys get on the open market there. But I think you need to bring one of these guys back. And then you need to ask yourself, how much can Kada play? And I don't know, how high are you on Kada going into next year?
I'm pretty high on him. I know that he's raw, but I also think that he has all the tools needed to succeed as an NBA center. And so it's just a question of developing him. And I do think that they've already kind of signaled that they want to develop him. I also think that he can shoot. Obviously, he hasn't shot quite a whole lot, but just watching him shoot every single day before games, like he has a fundamentally very sound shot, and he shoots at a high clip, just shooting around. Obviously, there's it's an enormous jump from to go from shooting around to being a 3-point shooter in games, but I don't think that he's a guy that is not going to have that be part of his offensive skill set down the road. And then as far as your thing about the minimum, O'Shea's the one that I think is the most replaceable of those three. I really like him. I loved what he brought to the team. I think he has a great energy about him. It's clear he's a good locker room guy. I always thought he did well in the minutes that he got. But I think he plays a role where I see a world where Jordan Walsh plays that role. I think that there's a clear pathway forward to replacing someone like him more so than Luke Cornett, which I think ended up developing a skill set that's a little bit more difficult to find. So I don't know. There's so much uncertainty. We'll probably get some clarity in the next couple of weeks here, at least on some of these guys. And likely the team has some insight on what people's individual demands are and where their heads are at. It's possible that one of these guys already is kind of out the door and we don't even really realize, right? So we'll get more clarity in the future, but that's why I thought that maybe we would see a big prioritize in the first round, just because there are so many question marks with this group, plus the Porzingis injury and just Porzingis in general. And then again, Al's going to be 39 by next year's playoffs, right? And so you have to kind of factor that in as well.
Yeah, and this is interesting too. B-Rob reporting that the Celtics are going to aim to extend White and Hauser this summer. I think that's all good and worthwhile pursuing. Do they actually get it done? That's another question here. Because again, when does the money become an issue with this team? Or not an issue, but just a limitation. The tax is going to grow enormous in 2026. I guess you can extend guys and figure out what you're doing with them later. And that might be what they do with these guys here. But as we discussed last night, White capped at 127. If you're White and you're looking at OG get 212, what are you thinking there? And that is something Jimmy brought up last night that I think is valid. Like, there's some serious money out there in free agency that I think you at least have to look at if you're him. But how much important is it just locking up some money now? And how important is it to stay with this team? I think those are all questions you got to ask with him. And how is it surprising here? Because you think there's a line on this roster, right? You got your big five, big six. Beyond that, can you pay other guys even a little bit of money? I know Keith Smith was tossed around 8, 9, 10 million as an offer to Hauser potentially here in extension talks. That even feels a little rich to me there. And I know he's certainly a guy who can go out there next summer and get a lot of money. Forsberg threw out the option that you can make him a restricted free agency this summer. I wouldn't even risk that because I think you just want him at that $2 million this year and figure it out from there. So this is another thing here as we start to think about Luke and X and all these guys. Are they just going to try to give everybody a little something here? Because White at 127 you can live with. I guess Hauser at like 8, 9 you can live with. And let's say the little bump for Luke and Tillman is like 3, 4, or 5 million. If you're going to eat tax, if you're Grossbeck, I guess you can just keep everybody here, but I'll believe it when I see it. Like, you're going to have to pick and choose a little bit here, I think.
Yeah, I was surprised by the reports that they're prioritizing extending Sam Hauser. I didn't think that was really possible, honestly. I kind of just assumed that this was one of those guys that you're going to have to part ways with at some point. And I do think that there's like a model that he follows, that there's other people that are going to have to, that you can find for that role, like the Svi Mihailik types, like potentially who they drafted right now. But Sam Hauser is proven now, and that's really hard to replace, right? Like, he has shown that he can defend in the NBA Finals. He's shown that you can't really take advantage of him the way that you might be able to other limited shooters, right? So there's not really question marks around him anymore. And so, there are some, but, for the most part, he's a proven NBA player that you can trust to be in the playoffs and in big moments. And so the value of that is really high. But the problem is, I think everyone in the league knows that now, right? So I still think that at the same time that he's not going to be around. He's not going to be, I don't think they're going to be able to extend him long term, but I would love to see him because I think that he, that also the whole story of how they kind of he's been here from the beginning. He was the main guy. Like, I love the idea of keeping as many of those guys around as you can. But I would be surprised if they're actually able to get it done the way that right now is, I guess, being discussed.
Yeah, and it's a balance. You obviously fall in love with these guys who helped you get a championship here, but is it worth doubling, tripling their salary potentially here? Because you expect more from them at that point, at least based on the returns and how many of these guys are capable of more. I mean, Hauser's been great. He's grown. And 8, 9, 10, again, million isn't bad for him. Like, that would probably actually be bargain money as the cap continues to rise here. But is he going to accept that? Like, are these guys obsessed with staying with Boston to the point where they're going to pass up free agency? That's a question too here. So we'll see how all that plays out. It's going to play out soon. The Hauser team option deadline is the 29th, which is just 2 days from now. The Kada option deadline is the 29th as well, so Saturday. And I think that's it for the team options, just Hauser and Kada, I want to say. So we'll see how those shake out. White, I'm sure they'll start those talks sooner rather than later. And we'll see what happens with those guys. As for tonight, 54th pick. Well, real quick, I want to shout out Game Time. It's summer. Game Time is where you're going to get all your concert, sports, women's basketball. You want to go down to Connecticut for a Sun game, they got you covered. Want to go to Fenway for a Red Sox game, they got you covered, and they're going to show you where you're sitting, and they're going to give you $20 off your first purchase with that code CLNS. So go to Game Time, open the app, and use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. A lot going on this summer, so get that Game Time app and see what's going on. I actually am going to try to go see Hiatus Coyote tomorrow. So I don't know if they're going to be on Game Time, but I'm going to check that out anyway and see if they get some deals there over at Roadrunner. So a lot going on. And we might get a light breather, Noah, after tonight with the draft ending, but that's free agency on Sunday. So we're staying busy as well. Tonight, 54th pick, right in front of Lakers. Do you look at Bronny? Do you try to pull a fast one in front of LA? I'm not as focused on that. I think this is where you try to get that developmental big and look at what he's going to try to do. I mean, look at what the team's going to try to do, and get a guy just on a two-way deal probably is what you're looking at in this range. And again, you're not expecting a ton at 54th overall in the draft. There's almost no chance that whoever they pick here is ever going to play for the team. But there's some flyers here. We'll see who falls to them. It's not going to be a Filipowski type, I'd imagine. It's not going to be any of the guys we kicked around, even Mogbo. So this is just a flyer, right? This might even be a draft and stash kind of pick.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what you're looking at, but also recognizing it's unusual to get someone at that point in the draft that is going to ever be impactful, but also, they've struck some of those picks have struck over the years, right? So that's what's so funny. I was looking at like the top 30, the 30 that were drafted last night, and it's that in 3 years we'll look at this list and it'll have so much more meaning of like who the busts were, who ended up being a complete steal, and it's just at this point it's so much of it is just speculation. But yeah, I do think they're going to take a big. I think, but like I said, I feel like every time I think something is going to happen in the draft, something else happens. It's funny to have watched the chat. I feel like it's all been about Bronny. And I feel like a lot of the discourse right now heading into the second round is about him. I don't think the Celtics will draft him. I feel like it would be a weird play. But I don't really understand like the Bronny politics and how teams are viewing it. If they're trying to get LeBron, I thought that whole thing ended with LeBron.
So what is your thought on the whole Bronny thing?
I mean, I'm just confused by it because I don't think that it used to feel like if you draft Bronny, you'll get LeBron eventually because they want to play together. But I feel like that's been dispelled at this point where both of them have kind of stated that that's not a priority anymore. So I think you just have to look at Bronny the prospect, and Bronny the prospect probably shouldn't be drafted, right? Just based off of like what he's done so far to this point. So I don't know. I think it's kind of weird, but it will be kind of funny if the Lakers are trying to draft him at 55 and the Celtics at 54, and it's a funny storyline. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's a name, right? And there's no names in this range. So it's the only guy you can bring up and talk about that generates any intrigue. Is there potential here? I guess, because, right, he's 19. He's got, LeBron's genes, and like there's certainly some flashes in high school there. So is this guy any worse of a pick than any other flyer at this spot who has next to no chance of making the league?
You can sell some jerseys.
Probably, right? Like he's probably a little bit worse of a pick than going with like a big man from overseas, or some of these guys who've been in college for a little bit who have been developing and are late risers, like Tristan Newton. Like you could use a little bit of a depth point guard if JD Davison's gonna go. Got to come in and develop a little bit on the back burner. Who knows what happens in that backcourt now or in the future. So like that's a good flyer to take. I don't think Bronny has great point guard skills or even the potential for great point guard skills at that spot. If you're looking for size at 6'1", he certainly doesn't bring that. IQ, like a guy like Ozo Ighodaro out of Marquette is just really blooming as this really bright guy who can break the game down, and there's a skill set and size there too at 6'9.5". So like I'd want that guy at 54. Jalen Bridges is a ready-made 3-and-D guy. Trent Flowers is a young guy who played in Australia last year. And, KOC, right, that there's some shades of Kelly Oubre there with the shot making. So, like, you just go up and down this list. Again, half these guys, maybe all these guys I'm mentioning right here, probably aren't going to make it. But I don't think Bronny is either.
Yeah, you're probably right. And I think that's why there's been so much hype around him. It's just people are excited by the familiarity. And he's someone that's been on, besides for just being LeBron's son, I mean, that's why he was, but everybody has been following his career for a couple of years now, and you just can't say the same for these other guys. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see what will happen. I have a feeling the person Celtics will draft is someone that people don't know very little about, and it's probably not a name that's on anyone's radar right now. Or maybe they trade it away and they don't draft anybody tonight. Who knows?
This is true too. Yeah, I don't think everything passes down. So I don't know. It seems like a little bit of a distraction too, right? Like if he's up in Maine all year, is it like, oh, Bronny needs to come down and be with the team? Like, I don't want to just deal with that whole thing there. And again, it's tough, right? Because Bronny should be able to forge his own basketball career and grow and take his time and be his own person, right? He shouldn't even be compared to LeBron James in any manner whatsoever because he's not LeBron James. But that whole thing is going to follow him. Do they need to play together? That whole thing's going to follow him. I still think that was probably a little bit of a mistake by LeBron putting that expectation out there. But on the bright side, it looks like he's going to go to the Lakers. It looks like he's going to get an opportunity in part because of his dad's. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Yeah, I think that could actually help him. The fact that he's just able to get his foot in the door and start developing behind the scenes there. But it shouldn't be in Boston. I don't think there's any good argument for it. So we'll see who it is. Enrique Freeman's another name I'd throw out there. A really late bloomer out of Akron, another big man prospect. So who knows? Who knows if the Celtics even pick here? I know Brad did say the other day that they're looking at a couple guys at this spot, or a couple guys in this draft. So do they come out of the draft with 2 guys tonight? We will see. The draft starts at 4. We are headed to the Auerbach Center now to go just follow along with the draft. We'll react live on the air as the Celtics are picking, and then we'll hear from Brad Stevens right after that because the draft will be over pretty quickly after the Celtics pick here tonight. Again, 4 p.m. is the start of this draft. I'd say the Celtics probably pick around 6-ish, 5:36. So we'll be live as that is imminent. If they trade up, we'll go live then. And again, we'll be doing it from Auerbach Center. So thanks to Noah for stopping by here, previewing all a little bit. A lot going on in the Celtics world. It's only going to heat up into this weekend. You can check out her work at Celtics blog. And we will see you later this afternoon in Brighton. Thanks, Noah.
Bye. Thank you.